Hello, welcome to today's session. This is on how to get moving and keep going. I'm Dr. Jennifer Cartwright and I'm joined by my colleague, Miss Jo Dawson. We're from the University of Sydney Institute for Musculoskeletal Health. We're both physiotherapists by background and we're also involved in coaching and motivational interviewing for clients, as well as doing behaviour change trials around helping people become more active. And so that's what we're hoping to share with you today is really some tips on creating lifelong physical activity habits for PD warriors. So here's how to use this session. In the downloads, we've offered a workbook. Now, this is by a group called Moving Medicine, and it's a really fabulous resource to guide you through setting some goals and creating a bit of a plan. Just an invitation for you to use this workbook as we go. Otherwise, feel free to use a notebook or feel free to just watch and absorb. It's entirely up to you. So watch and listen, and we'll explain each step as we go. We've also put in some opportunities to pause the video. So when prompted, this is with the orange moments, we'll invite you to pause the video to think or perhaps write something down. And we invite you to write it down as well. Grab a pen, use the workbook or a notebook. We know from behaviour change trials that writing something down, having it in the physical world is a really powerful tool for creating change. And feel free to go at your pace. So pause the video as needed. This is up to you. It's your plan and there's no rush. So as a quick overview of today, this is divided into 3 sections. So section 1 is on the why. So why be active with Parkinson's? And we'll go into the evidence around it, but also we'll explore why it can be hard. Section 2 will be on your why, and this is really starting to find your own motivation for being active, or if you're already quite active, finding your motivation for keeping it going as a lifelong habit. And then section 3 will look at creating your plan, and this is really some evidence-based strategies and tips for getting started and staying active, or for increasing your physical activity if you're already quite active. And so to get started, let's dive into the why around the evidence for being active with Parkinson's and also why it can be hard. Before we get started, just take a moment to pause and reflect. Perhaps you've taken time out of your busy day. I'd like you to reflect just for a couple of moments. Why did you set aside time to watch this today? I'm sure there are dozens or maybe hundreds of things you could be doing right now. What made this session important to you? And just have a think about it. I invite you to write it down as well if you like. And what are you hoping to gain from this session? When you saw this in the program, what made you click on the link and watch the video? And perhaps 1 or 2 things that you'd like to get out of this yourself. So let's start with the foundation of what is physical activity. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of leisure activity. So things like sport, recreation, or therapeutic exercise. I'm sure most of you will be doing some kind of exercise program from a physiotherapist or an exercise physiologist. We're familiar with this idea of leisure activity. But activity can take the form of different types of activity. So you can be active during transport. So if you're walking or cycling to work or to the shops or out to leisure opportunities. You can also be active in your job, so in work and also in household activity, particularly things like cleaning or doing things like gardening outdoors. So just worth considering when we're thinking about physical activity, and this talk today won't just be on the specific exercises that you're doing, but thinking about physical activity more globally and thinking of it as all the movement you're doing in your day. There are 3 different levels of physical activity which are helpful to think about as well. So light physical activity are things like walking the dog or perhaps going for a stroll. You're not really getting your heart rate up very much. You're moving, but it's quite leisurely. It's quite an easy sort of pace. Then there's moderate physical activity. This is where you're working a little bit harder. So you might be getting your breathing or your heart rate up. You might be sweating a little bit, but you're still able to speak in a whole sentence. You're still able to talk quite comfortably. And then there's vigorous physical activity. So this is when you're really huffing and puffing, you're getting your heart rate and breathing up, you're sweating, you're working really hard. This is vigorous activity. And this is really a level you can only sustain for so long. It might be 5 minutes or 10 or 20 minutes. So it's worth considering these 3 levels of physical activity because in a nutshell, all movement, all activity is helpful. And also, it's really the moderate and vigorous types of activity that you're going to be getting the most benefit from. And it's worth adding as well, any of these 3 levels could be a walk. A light walk would be a stroll with the dog. A moderate walk might be a little bit more of a brisk pace, or a vigorous walk could be when you're really walking up and down hills, you're walking really hard. So it's not so much what you're doing, but the intensity that you're doing it at. And so, why does movement matter in Parkinson's? I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, and there's some really strong research that physical activity helps Parkinson's in a lot of different ways. So, being active helps with your movement. So, there are benefits like improving your balance, having better gait or walking, and having better mobility to get around. Being active improves your brain health. So, physical activity supports your thinking and memory processes. Being active also improves your mood. So there's some good evidence to show that it can reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. And being active also improves your quality of life. And so you'll notice things like feeling more energy, being able to stay independent, which I know for a lot of people, that's a really important goal. And feeling a sense of joy. If you find an activity that you do enjoy, physical activity can be enjoyable in and of itself. There's also some evidence to suggest that physical activity can be neuroprotective, so it might help slow the progression of Parkinson's. And then there's the question of what kinds of activity help the most. Well, there's 4 different types of physical activity, and some activities actually tick more than one of these boxes. So you've got your aerobic activity. This is when you're getting your heart rate and breathing up, things like walking, swimming, cycling, or dancing. And then there's strength training. So things like working out, lifting weights or using resistance bands or even using your own body weight. These are more strengthening exercises to strengthen your muscles. And there's balance exercises. So things like Tai Chi or perhaps doing standing exercises if you have a program, things like Pilates as well. And there's flexibility activities. So stretching, yoga, and gentle movement. All of these activities are beneficial, and it's worth keeping in mind that it can really be helpful to have a couple of these different types in your week. So doing some aerobic, doing some strength, balance, and flexibility. That way you're getting those benefits across the board. So just take a moment now. I invite you to pause the video and think about, how does physical activity fit into your life right now? And there's a space in the Moving Medicine workbook, or write it in your own workbook. Think about, how does physical activity currently fit into my life? So what does a normal day look like in terms of movement? What am I doing across the week? Even just jotting down a few sentences or words. Here's what we know about some of the challenges for people with Parkinson's and why being active and why staying active can be hard. So things like having fatigue and having those off periods during the day. There might be a fear of falling or injury as well. Things like low confidence and motivation. So perhaps you've been really active in the past, and now with a changing body and with perhaps some symptoms, that there's not quite that confidence, that you're not quite able to do what you used to do. On the other camp is, you might have never been particularly active or sporty when you were younger, but now that you're really understanding the benefits of being active, that it can be hard to start something new altogether. Having limited options, so things like accessibility or perhaps transport or cost, a lot of these things can be challenges, particularly for people in rural and regional areas. And sometimes those fluctuating symptoms can disrupt the routine. So it can be hard to predict when the good and the bad days, or even those on and off periods during the day, are going to happen. And so here's a study that our colleagues at the University of Sydney have done, looking at what are the barriers for people that are currently not doing a lot of physical activity. So in the red, you'll see adults with disability, and people with Parkinson's formed a big cohort of this group. And in the blue are adults without disability. So in the red, the biggest factor for people with disability are things like poor health or injury. Whereas for adults without disability, their biggest factor was time, or perhaps they've already got a physical job. So just to contrast the differences between people with and without disability. And here are the motivators for people that are currently not doing a lot of activity. And you'll see that between the red and the blue, so with and without disability, the motivators are actually quite similar. So the biggest reason for most people was around improving their physical health or fitness. And that was the biggest motivator for people who are currently not doing a lot of activity to be more active. Another chance to pause and reflect here. Just have a moment to think about what are your main barriers to being more active? What are some of the challenges? What are the things that are in the way or that could pop up that you see in the future? And then just thinking briefly about what are some of your motivators? Are they similar to the ones we just saw on the previous slide around improving your health or ability? Or are there other reasons there? Take a few moments to jot down some ideas. And so that brings us to the end of this section around the evidence for being active and also why it can be hard. And now I'm going to take you through section 2. And in this section, we're going to look a little bit more deeply into your why. Now, this is obviously pre-recorded and this is very personal to you. So I invite you again to pause the video as needed, because we're going to look at finding your own motivation for being active. Because what we know about behavior change is that motivation is a really key part of creating a habit and keeping it going. So looking at motivation, it really sits on a continuum. So down one end of the continuum, you've got amotivation. And this is if there's not a lot of motivation for change. You're quite happy the way you are, and it's not a good or bad thing, but it's just whether you're wanting to make a change or not. Then in the middle, we've got the extrinsic motivation. And these are things where there's an external factor that's primarily driving what you're doing. So we often hear things from clients like, my doctor told me to, or my wife or my husband is nagging me to be more active, or I want to do it for my kids. Extrinsic motivation can be powerful in the early stages of behavior change. And this is when, in creating a plan, it can be helpful to have external rewards as well. So perhaps a cup of coffee or giving yourself a gold star, ticking off the activity at the end of the day. Jo will share more about some strategies around this. So extrinsic motivation can be really useful. But what we know at the end of the spectrum is intrinsic motivation. And this is when people are intrinsically motivated. So you're motivated from the inside out. And you might think things like, oh, look, I feel so much better when I move, or I just really enjoy what I'm doing. And we know from behavior change research that the more intrinsically motivated you can be, the more likely you are to initiate and maintain that behavior, to start being active and to keep being active. And this is when there are things like there's a values shift. So physical activity becomes valuable in and of itself because you enjoy doing it and you see the benefits for yourself. And this is where the role of a good health professional or a coach can come in to help you become more intrinsically motivated. So in your workbook now, the next section is thinking about how important being active is to you. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is it to you to become more active? Is it a 5 or a 7 or perhaps a 9 or a 10? So I invite you to circle that number in your workbook. And then the next question is, ask yourself, why did you choose that number and not a lower one? So why did you choose it a 5 and not a 1? Or why was it a 9 and not a 1? And thinking about that, thinking about why you ranked it so highly, can start thinking about your own motivation, your own reasons for change. The next question there is, how confident are you? So again, on that scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you will be able to increase your activity levels? Or if you're already quite active, how confident are you that you can keep it going? And again, score it a number from 0 to 10. Then once you've done that, again, ask yourself, why was that number and not a lower one? And again, some of the things that come up will be your reasons for being confident in making a change around physical activity. And I invite you to pause and reflect here and think about perhaps what's impacting your motivation. What are some of the things there at the moment around your motivation? What are the things that are motivating factors, or perhaps they're working against your motivation? What are some of the things that are there for you now? And also, I'd like you to look at those two numbers, so the importance number and the confidence number, and think about which number is lower. So was it how important exercise is or how confident you are? Looking at which number is lower can help you identify which support you might need to help get you going or keep you going. And Jo will share some strategies later on in this session. Next in the workbook are some spaces to identify your 3 best reasons for becoming more active, because your reasons are more powerful than ours. So in the first section, we looked at the evidence for why physical activity is beneficial. But what are your reasons? What matters most to you? And it might be something around physical activity, or it might be something more broadly in life, like family or goals that you've got, what you'd like to be doing in the future. Take a few moments to write down your 3 best reasons in your workbook. Next, I'd like you to imagine 6 months from now. Imagine what might change because of being more active. What would you be able to do that you can't do now? So if you're 6 months in the future and you're consistently being more active, what would change? What would you be able to do? How would you feel? What changes would you notice? What changes would you notice physically or mentally within yourself? And who else might notice the difference? Who else in your life might notice that you have more energy or are feeling better about yourself? And there's space in your workbook to write down some of these differences that you might notice in 6 months' time. Next, we'll think about the activities you've enjoyed. So what have you enjoyed doing in the past? Or perhaps what's something that you've always wanted to try? Here are some examples or some ideas. Maybe walking or swimming, or perhaps dancing or gardening, maybe cycling, yoga or Tai Chi. And there's so many more exercises to think about. Write down a couple of things that you've enjoyed in the past or have perhaps wanted to try. Now we're going to bring that all together and create your personal why in one sentence. In coaching, we call this a vision statement. And this is one sentence that outlines your why, for summing up your reasons for being more active or for staying active. And you'll start with I want. So what's one thing you want around your health and well-being? So it might be more energy, it might be staying independent, it might be feeling stronger or feeling more confident. What comes to mind around something that you would like for your health and well-being? And then think about, what would that do for you? So this will be what comes after that, so that. So an example might be, I want more energy so that I can play with my grandkids, or I want to improve my balance so that I can stay at home and live independently for as long as possible. What feels right for you? And there's no right or wrong. It might be a couple of things. Really take a few moments. I really encourage you to do this, because this one sentence can be something that's really valuable to come back to, particularly for those challenging times or when motivation dips. And so write this down in some blank space or in your workbook. So that brings us to the end of section 2. So hopefully you're getting a little bit clearer on that motivation. So some of those reasons for being more active. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Jo, who's going to take you through your plan and looking at some evidence-based strategies and tips for getting started and staying active.
Hi, I'm Jo. Thanks very much, Jen, for going through the whys. So, not just the evidence behind exercise and why it's important, particularly for people with Parkinson's, but also really how to delve into finding your why and your reason to do exercise and be a little bit more physically active. In this next section, we're going to really focus around the planning around that. So, really looking into things like goal setting, but then creating a bit more of a structure around not just having a goal, but how to actually work forwards and do our best to achieve those goals. So first of all, when we are thinking about goals, we've got two kind of different categories of them. So we have outcome-based goals, which is kind of what goal. So it's what is the desired result that we are trying to achieve. And typically they are more future focused and they have a tendency to be influenced more by things around us that we don't have control over. So things like poor weather or poor health. And an example of one of these could be I want to be able to walk 1 kilometre to the local shop to pick up the milk every third day, which is, a really good goal to have and have in mind. Then, in contrast, we have behavioural goals. That's the how, what are we going to be doing? And these are more set around processes or actions that we want to start taking place. And typically speaking, we have a little bit more control over these goals. So it's more about starting behaviours and having control over that. So, an example of one of these goals would be I will walk to the letterbox every day after lunch to start building up my fitness. And we can see how these two goals are interlinked, that the behavior goal is how we build up towards that outcome based goal. But it's important that we have that smaller behavior style goal to help build towards that desired outcome. And again, when we're thinking about goals, I'm sure everyone is familiar with SMART goals. It is something that is talked about an awful lot. And it's, there's a reason why they are important. Making goals specific and attainable that are relevant and we have structure around it means that we are more likely to achieve them. When we're thinking about setting goals more for behavior change and something that we want to continue doing long term into the future, we've also got this acronym that has E and R on the end, so making goals enjoyable and repeatable as well. If you think about habits that you do have currently, things that are more enjoyable tend to be more repeatable as well. That it's not just I'm doing this for a short period of time to get myself healthy. What we're really trying to find is something that you can continue over a long period of time, and therefore enjoyable things are much more likely to stick. Some of the key principles that we should be thinking about when we are setting goals is really linking it back to that vision statement that Jen was just talking about. So that I want to, so that I can, and making those goals specific to that vision. Another thing to consider is starting off nice and small. So having a small stepping stone to build you up towards that bigger vision. Another thing to consider when we are setting goals is our confidence in achieving them. And it's using that interval system that Jen had up before. And 0 is there's no way that's not going to happen. And 10 is I'm so confident that I can achieve this. And typically when we are setting out goals, it's probably unlikely that we're at that 10 out of 10, but we really want to try and achieve 7 or a higher. And it's okay if you look at a goal and say, I'm probably about a 6 on that spectrum. But what that tells us is that we need to go back to that goal and recalibrate something. So it might just make it slightly smaller and more achievable. And that's where our starting point is. So in your workbook, there's a section to write different types of goals. So we've got short-term goals, which is something that you're aiming for over the next 2 to 4 weeks. So something that is quite small that you are confident that you can achieve soon. So it's thinking about, what is in my power to change right now that helps me work towards that vision statement that I wrote earlier. Then we have our medium-term goals. So that's something in the next 2 to 4 months. So building on that momentum of something that I can work on over the next couple of weeks. If I'm doing that consistently, what is realistic that I feel like I can be achieving in 2 to 4 months? What might that look like? How am I going to fit it into my regular week and day? And then our long-term goal. So that's similar to that vision statement is what does the next 6 to 12 months look like? This time next year, what am I hoping to be doing? It's that really big picture of what ultimately am I working towards. So again, very similar to that vision statement. And it's up to you how you structure writing these down. You might start with that long-term goal and then go to the short-term goal and then find something to put in the middle. Or you might work down from where I want to be in 6 months' time to medium term and then to short term. Do what feels right for you. But again, thinking back about how confident am I that I can do that within that time frame, and feel free to readjust it if you need to. The next thing to consider when we are setting goals is how are you going to get there? So it's thinking about where is it going to happen? So where are you going to be active? Is it going to be at home, the local park? Is there a gym class that you can attend? Do you need a clear space at home? So really creating that environment and that setup to help you to succeed. The next thing to consider is when. When's it going to fit into your day or your week? How are you going to structure it? Are you going to need to put an alarm or a reminder on? Or do you need to schedule it into your diary? And then there's what do you need? Is there something that you actually physically need to get started? So is there any equipment that you need to go and purchase? Or it might be an exercise mat or a couple of weights. Often you'll find that it's very little that you need to actually start getting more physically active. Again, there's a section in your workbook that you can fill out as to what will you need to accomplish these goals. When we're setting goals, it's really important to consider our strengths as well. So when we're talking about our strengths, it's really looking at what assets do we have that can help us succeed. And if we break it into a number of different categories, it can be easier to identify some of the strengths that we do have. So the first one to consider is things that we've done in the past. What have we done when working towards a goal in the past that has helped us to succeed? So it might not be specific to exercise, it might be a career goal that you've had, and you're really good at setting up a structure or routine to help work towards that career goal. Or it might be linked to something you have done for exercise in the past. Thinking about your different personal qualities. So, are you a routine driven person? Are you really determined once you set your mind to something, or can you show a lot of discipline? Thinking about those different personal qualities or characteristics that you have and how they might help you to succeed in different goals. Thinking about who's around you to support. So, is it a strong family that you might have, or really close friends that might be able to support you? Considering your energy windows. So, do you know the time of day that you do have most energy and therefore are most likely to be able to participate in exercise? What do you enjoy? So, thinking back about what Jen was talking about before, is what have you done in the past that you've enjoyed? It's really trying to link in things that you are going to enjoy, you're more likely to continue doing into the future as well. And then it's thinking about the environment around you. So, do you have beautiful nature around you and lovely parks? Do you have access to a local pool or gym? Or maybe you've got great walking routes around you. It's thinking about that environment around you and how you can utilize it to help make exercise easier. And then this next component is something that people are normally pretty good at being able to identify. So, things that might get in the way. And the reason why we bring this up is that if we identify things that might get in the way early and have a plan B for them, then it won't catch us off guard and we can continue on with the goal that we have set out. So in this section, it's trying to think of potentially 3 different things that might get in the way, and then your plan B that's around them. And then on this next slide, we've got a couple of examples of what might come up. So one of the things that is common to come up is fatigue or your off periods. And an easy workaround for that is really planning your exercise around the best time of your day. So know when your on periods are and trying to time exercise for those periods. Having a fear of falling. And so it's really thinking about how you're going to start your exercise. So potentially starting with seated exercises or having really good supports around you where you are safe to exercise. And bad weather is a really common one. So it might be too hot, it might be too cold, it might be rainy, it might be windy. The elements are often a reason that might stop us from exercising. So our plan B might just be having an indoor activity to do instead of something that involves going outdoors. And it's really important to acknowledge that progress isn't always linear. So it's considering our goals like we're conducting an experiment, that we've got a hypothesis, we've got a plan in place, but it might not always go to plan, and that's okay. So if we strip it back and say, okay, what went well, but maybe what didn't go as well or didn't go to plan, and then trying to come up with a strategy that's slightly different and work towards a new amended goal. So it's just considering readjusting your goals as you need to rather than throwing them in the bin. When you do readjust, it might be starting smaller again. So, again, going back to that confidence interval as to, am I confident that I can achieve this new goal that I've set out? If it's not that 7 or higher, then just make it a little bit smaller. You don't have to change it completely, but make it more attainable. And then considering who else you can reach out to. So, is there another health professional that you can link in with? Is there a family member that you might be able to get a different type of support from to help you to succeed? In terms of the types of support that we can look for in people, there's emotional support. So, that's people that you can share your wins with that might hold you accountable, but they can also participate in exercise with you. Then we have our strategic support. So they're our health professionals. They're the ones that can offer advice on what to do or how to navigate different barriers that are coming up. And then there's people that can offer practical support. So it might be that I want to attend an exercise class, but I can't physically get myself there. Or it might be someone that can help set it up the home safely so you've got an exercise zone. So again, in your workbook, there's a section to write down the people that might be able to support you and the type of support that they can offer. And we'd recommend thinking about potentially person one being a close family member, friend, someone that might be able to offer more of that emotional support. And then thinking about potentially person two being a health professional or someone in the local community that can offer more of that strategic or practical support. When we're talking about setting goals and the activities that you are choosing to get involved with and start working towards, is thinking about what's going to fit in your life with the least resistance. So thinking about things that are local and accessible. Again, thinking about things that are enjoyable for you to do and things that are also affordable. Lastly, in our workbook, it's using our activity plan to try and map out what the week and what the month might look like. So by thinking about what are those goals that you have set, what's the activity that you want to be doing, where is that going to be fitting within your week? So what day of the week does it fall on? Is it morning, lunchtime, evening that you're going to complete it on? On this activity plan, there's also that little square at the bottom so you can tick box, yep, I did this today, or no, I didn't do this. On the right there's also a section to write some comments about how you did each week. So it can be a really nice tool to write down things that went well or things that didn't go as well. It can help identify things that do come up and get in the way on a regular basis, so things that we do have to start planning around. But it can also be a way of monitoring some of your symptoms as well. So writing down things like fatigue or pain, and how you felt generally that week, you might start noticing that it's changing week from week as you start progressing through regular exercise. So again, feel free to pause it here, fill in that timetable of what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. Another thing to consider is tracking your progress. So writing down what you're doing or how much you're doing can be a really motivating way to see some of that progression that you are making. And you can do it through a number of ways. So using something like an activity diary that we just showed, so pen and paper, writing down what you're doing. There's also a lot of apps on your phone and things like smartwatches that you can use to track your progress. And it might look like just telling someone. So it might have someone that you call on a weekly basis and just letting them know how you're going. By tracking our progress, it allows us to celebrate our wins. So whether it is through writing it on pen and paper, logging it through our phone, telling someone, it allows us to step back and actually look how much I've done and actually acknowledge and celebrate those wins. It's important that we actually utilize the technology that is around us as well. So things like if you do have an Apple Watch, we've got a handout here to describe how to access the step count on it, what the different activity rings mean, or how to log an activity. And this is just an indication of some of the apps that you can download on your phone as well to track simple things like how much walking you're doing. And that takes us to the end of your plan. So, what you can actually put in place around setting goals, but creating a bit of an action plan as to how you're going to achieve those goals as well, and preempting things that might get in the way and having a plan B as well. I'm going to bring it back to Jen here.
So thanks so much for watching so far. And before you go, I'd really like you to remember these three things. So you're really in the driver's seat. And what we know about behavior change and motivation is change is most likely to happen and be sustained over the long term when it comes from within. So really setting your own goals, having your own pace and your own plan, as Joe outlined. And remembering as well, like Joe touched on, that progress isn't linear and often progress doesn't happen as quickly as we would like. But thinking about, if those challenges arise, perhaps they're within or something external, resetting and refocusing as needed, using those tools that Joe has just taken you through. And as well, really reinforcing that no amount is too small. We all know the benefits of being physically active for our mood, our physical health, particularly for symptoms of Parkinson's. So really start from where you're at and build gradually. And just to finish with, I invite you to pause and reflect here. What was your biggest takeaway from today? What was one or perhaps a couple of things that really stood out for you, that have really landed? And then thinking as well, whether you've done the plan or whether you've simply watched and absorbed the content, perhaps think about what's one small action you can take towards being more active. It might be something around preparation, so looking into activities in your local area or perhaps creating that plan that Joe's walked you through. Or it might be a physical activity action. Can you fit in a little bit more activity in your day today or perhaps tomorrow? And so thanks so much for watching. That brings us to the end of the session. I really hope you've enjoyed it and found it valuable. Here are our contacts for myself and Joe. We'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line either on our emails. We'd love to know, even just what's one thing that you found beneficial from today. This will help us guide future content and education that we provide. We're also on Instagram as well, and we share content around motivation and behavior change and physical activity. So feel free to jump on there and check out some of the stuff we're sharing. So thanks so much for watching, and it's bye for now.